There is a moment before the trigger breaks, when time stops existing. Your breath is half expelled. Your heartbeat slows between contractions. The crosshairs float over a living target at 1,100 meters, and the world reduces itself to the size of a reticle. Everything that brought you here, every crawl through Carolina mud, every sleepless night, every impossible shot on a range that felt like failure, condenses into this single, suspended instant. You don't know it yet, but this is what you were built for. This is the life you chose, and it will cost you more than you ever calculated. You arrive at Scout Sniper School carrying 60 pounds of equipment and a confidence that the instructors will systematically dismantle over the next 10 weeks. The humidity in Quantico wraps around your body like a second skin you didn't ask for. The men watching you from the shade don't smile. They evaluate. They sort candidates into categories invisible to everyone except them. Potential, marginal, waste of time. Nobody tells you where you stand. Nobody tells you anything except where to go and when to move. The attrition rate is 70%. They mention this on the first morning the way someone mentions the weather. Flat, informational, without drama. 7 out of 10 men standing next to you will not finish this course. Some will quit. Some will be cut. Some will simply fracture along lines of stress that weren't visible until the pressure found them. You file this information away and decide it does not apply to you. Your first week is not about shooting. It never is. The first week is about stalking, moving across open terrain without being detected by instructors with binoculars and years of experience spotting exactly what you're trying to hide. You crawl through fields of dry grass at the speed of a slow tide. You build a ghillie suit from burlap and local vegetation until you are not a man anymore, but a moving piece of the landscape itself. You learn to travel inches per hour. You learn that patience is not passive. Patience is a weapon, and the man who masters it masters everything that follows. You fail your first stalk. You fail your second. On the third attempt, you make it within 200 meters of the instructor before he glass checks the tree line behind you and calls your position from memory. You start over. You do not complain. Complaining is evidence of a man who hasn't understood the lesson yet. The shooting arrives later and is harder than you expected. You grew up with rifles. You can put rounds on targets at distances that impress civilians and most soldiers. But precision marksmanship at 1,000 yards is a different religion entirely. Wind doesn't push the bullet. Wind curves it, bends it through invisible corridors of temperature and density that shift second by second. Gravity pulls the round in a descending arc that requires mathematics, not instinct. The fundamentals you believed you owned are foundations still being constructed beneath your feet. The final field exercise destroys candidates who survived everything else. 4 days with minimal resupply, scored stalks, scored shots, sleep measured in 40-minute intervals between tasks. Your body stops differentiating between mud and skin. Your mind collapses the universe down to the next task and builds a wall against everything beyond it. Instructors watch for the specific kind of mental fracture that doesn't look like weakness. It looks like quiet. The candidate who stops talking. The one whose eyes go somewhere else. They're gone within hours, not punished. Recognized as unsuited. The profession demands a psychology that cannot be created, only discovered. You graduate in the bottom third of your class, not celebrated, not shamed, competent. You receive your MOS designation and your orders and arrive at a team that needs shooters more than it needs heroes. Your team leader is a staff sergeant from Georgia who has been deployed so many times the number has stopped meaning anything to him. He carries the weight of those deployments in the way he sits in restaurants, always facing the door, always with his back to the wall, always half present, half somewhere else. He doesn't talk about the things he's seen. He doesn't need to. You can read them in the architecture of his silence. You are the spotter now. The shooter takes the shot, but the spotter builds the world around it. Wind calls, range estimation, target identification, sector documentation, atmospheric correction. You are the shooter's external brain, processing everything so he can focus entirely on the mechanics of the perfect shot. You learn that the spotter who talks too much is more dangerous than the spotter who says too little. You learn to communicate in compressed language, to reduce complex atmospheric realities into 3-word transmissions that contain everything the shooter needs. Your first deployment is to a country you are not authorized to name, conducting operations that do not officially occur. The rules of engagement change weekly. The enemy doesn't wear a uniform. He looks like everyone else until the moment he decides not to. You learn to read threat in the geometry of hands, in the rhythm of walking, in the way a man's eyes track a patrol route. You learn that the half second before violence has a texture you can eventually recognize. Your first confirmed kill as a spotter is a man with an RPG. Your shooter calls the wind at 800 meters. The round arrives before the sound. One moment the man is positioning his launcher toward a convoy route. The next moment he is no longer a threat. You expected something larger from this moment, triumph, revulsion, something cinematic. What you feel instead is the quiet satisfaction of professional execution. The shot was clean. The target was valid. The outcome was correct. You file the man's face and move to the next task. The months accumulate. You learn the atmospheric patterns of specific terrain, how morning air moves differently than afternoon air in valleys versus ridgelines. You learn to improvise hide positions when the perfect position doesn't exist. You learn to swallow the shot when the conditions aren't right, which is harder than taking it. You learn the silence that lives between operational rotations, the strange emptiness of secure zones where nothing happens but waiting and memory. When your team leader rotates home, you become the shooter. Your first shot in the primary role is straightforward, a confirmed hostile at 600 meters in calm conditions. The mechanics perform exactly as trained. Breath, pause, squeeze. You watch the round arrive and note the result with clinical precision. You move. The hard shot comes later. Intelligence has located 3 American aid workers held in a compound in a narrow valley, confirmed by multiple sources within a 6-hour window. One execution video already exists. The rescue window is closing. You set up 1,400 meters out, farther than you've shot in live conditions, in crosswind that shifts every 3 minutes as valley thermals rewrite the physics of the shot. You wait 4 hours. You watch the compound through optics that make distance irrelevant. You memorize guard rotations. You see the hostages briefly through a window. Faces from the briefing photos, alive for now. But the clock is audible. The shot comes at dusk. The target stops at a predictable position for 11 seconds. You apply corrections that exist somewhere between calculation and intuition, between mathematics and the 10,000 hours of muscle memory behind your trigger finger. The round flies true. The assault begins. 20 minutes later, the hostages are on helicopters and you are breaking down your position in complete darkness. 3 people will live because of that shot. The weight redistributes but never leaves. You eventually return to the school as an instructor, standing where they stood, evaluating candidates who remind you of a version of yourself you barely recognize. You learn that teaching reveals what you don't actually understand, the things you do correctly through habit rather than comprehension. Explaining forces analysis. Analysis builds depth. You become a better shooter by learning how to create them. You watch candidates break against the same walls you broke against. You learn to predict the ones who will persist. It is never the strongest or the most talented. It is always the ones who treat failure as a data point rather than a verdict. The operational edge dulls slightly in the classroom. Not technique. Technique stays. Something harder to name. The readiness for violence that combat requires becomes theoretical when the violence is hypothetical. You miss the stripped clarity of deployment. You miss the way the world simplifies when the stakes are absolute. When the opportunity comes for another rotation, you take it without deliberation. You lead a team now. Younger faces that share no cultural references with you. Technology that didn't exist when you started. They call you old man with affection that you accept because the alternative is correcting them, and correcting them would cost something you don't want to spend. Your knees announce the weather. Your back archives every position you've ever occupied. The recovery window after hard operations stretches from days into weeks. You lead because experience is a compounding asset, and because the team needs someone who has already made the mistakes that kill people. Your reputation-defining shot comes at 1,700 meters, variable wind, difficult angle, a target moving between vehicles in a pattern that created a window measured in seconds. You made it because you had to, and you made it well because the alternative was unacceptable. The team talks about that shot. It inflates with each retelling, acquiring details that weren't there. You don't correct them. Morale has operational value. The shot that matters more is the one nobody talks about. A target engaged on solid intelligence that turned out to be wrong. The round was perfect. The intelligence was not. A civilian died in a place he should not have been. The review boards cleared you. The rules of engagement cleared you. The face never clears you. It joins the others behind your eyes and asks questions that your justifications cannot answer. You learn to carry this because the alternative is not carrying any of it. And the soldiers who feel nothing scare you more than the ones who feel everything. The title of master is never official. It is conferred by the people who have watched you work for long enough to run out of other words. It means you have survived into rarity. You rotate between deployment and weapons development. You test new optics and new platforms and new technologies that promise to remove human variables from the equation. You understand what the engineers don't. Human variables are also how good judgment happens. Remove too much of the human, and you lose the moral weight that keeps the weapon bounded by conscience. Your final deployment is the easiest and the hardest. Easy because operations are routine. Hard because you know it is the last, and knowing changes the texture of everything. You appreciate shots that would have been invisible to you years ago. You watch your team with the awareness of ending. The last shot is unremarkable. Medium range, confirmed target, standard conditions, professional execution. You don't know it's the last until you're already on the transport home. Then you know, and the knowing settles over you like weather. 22 years. More operations than you can number without documentation. Kills you stopped counting, because counting felt like the wrong relationship to have with the work. You have shaped a generation of shooters who are shaping the next. The techniques you refined are being taught by people who don't know your name. The faces come with you. The sounds. The smell of propellant in cold air. The hypervigilance that protected you in combat and marks you as strange in grocery stores. The relationships that couldn't survive the person you were required to become, but also this. The people who are alive because you were precise. The convoys that reached their destinations. The attacks that never happened because the planners were removed before they could execute. The hostages who have children now. The math doesn't balance, and it was never going to. You did what was asked. You did it better than most. The scope goes in a case that goes in a closet. Some nights you dream of shots you didn't take. The hesitations. The targets that moved before the decision resolved. You wonder about the lives that continued because you waited. Whether those lives went on to do good or harm in the years your hesitation gave them, you'll never know. That is the nature of the work. One breath at a time, one trigger break at a time. The discipline holds until it doesn't need to anymore, and then something else holds in its place. Something quieter, something that has no name in any military manual, but lives in every man who has done this work and come back to a world that will never fully understand what he carried home. If this story reached something in you, something that made you understand the weight behind the scope, leave a comment below. Tell me which level you found most brutal. Subscribe if you want to go deeper into the worlds that most people only see from the outside. And if this video hit different, hit the like button, because this story deserves to be heard.